Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I rise this evening to address an important issue which was highlighted last month by the Independent Commission Against Corruption. The ICAC released a discussion paper on lobbying, access and influence in New South Wales as a part of Operation Eclipse. The discussion paper takes a well overdue look at the state of lobbying in New South Wales and the efforts of a rich few to selfishly and profoundly undermine our democratic system. It's true in a broad sense that the capacity for individuals to put forward their ideas to decision makers is central to democracy and good decision making. The question, of course, is how, when and why this lobbying takes place. When it's conducted along proper lines, it's open, transparent and focused on the community, it often has beneficial outcomes. But a poorly regulated lobbying system risks giving more of a voice to those who are wealthy and well connected, to those individuals and groups who just strive for profit rather than for the common good. Who is in the room matters when it comes to political outcomes, and if those powerful groups are more likely to get access to senior ministers and decision makers, their interests will triumph over those of the public. At a quick glance at the Premier's diary will reveal that most months she meets more with corporate interests rather than community organisations, and this is something that should concern us all. In 2010, the ICAC's report, Investigation into Corruption Risks Involved in Lobbying, Operation Halifax, the ICAC made a number of recommendations to tighten the lobbying legislative and regulatory framework. Some but not all of these elements recommended by the Commission have been implemented. However, the system that we are left with permits lobbying activities that fundamentally lacks transparency and leaves open the question of integrity. Corrupt conduct can only exist behind a veil of secrecy where proper and public transparency is not prioritised. Ensuring transparency in lobbying procedures significantly reduces the likelihood of undue access to influence on government decisions. Transparency measures also allow the public to make judgments about the impact of lobbyists' influence on decision-making processes and on governments themselves. Typically, of course, when we think of political corruption, we think of a simple quid pro quo arrangement, a bag full of cash given in exchange for a political favour. But the corrupting effect of unregulated lobbying is a more subtle art. Perhaps the most damaging example of this relates to the revolving door. It's now common term in parlance. The revolving door involves former ministers, shadow ministers, senior staff who move on to either work as lobbyists or act for businesses directly related to the portfolios they once covered. These politicians and senior bureaucrats can effectively sell the knowledge, privilege and access of their positions to the private sector, and in doing so can undermine our democratic system. Nowhere is this more prevalent than in the planning and infrastructure sector in New South Wales. The interplay in particular of Liberal politicians and the organisations planning, funding and building projects is really quite remarkable. While many politicians may go on to work in the private sector for honourable reasons, it's clear that we need to have effective ways to help manage this. At its best, the revolving door demonstrates the closeness of politicians to the industries they govern, often to the detriment of the public good, and at its worst, it creates the possibility that a job taken after retirement is simply a proxy for a bribe. For these reasons, we'll be making a strong submission to the Independent Commission Against Corruption discussion paper addressing this issue of revolving door, as well as a whole range of other matters which can be implemented to increase the transparency of lobbying. One of those steps the government has taken, for example, is introducing a ministerial diary. We think that should be extended to shadow cabinet ministers from the other side of the chamber, and a whole range of other measures that we'll put together that we'll be presenting in our submission. But one of those important issues is a proper cooling off period or post-separation ban period. During the cooling off periods, lobbyists should be prohibited from working as former MPs and senior staff should be prohibited from working as consultant lobbyists, working for an organisation and carrying out lobbying activities on behalf of the organisation, or working for a corporation if lobbying constitutes a significant part of the work on behalf of the corporation. Currently, there is an 18-month post-ban separation in New South Wales, which only covers ministers and parliamentary secretaries and does not include senior ministerial advisors or senior public service, which is weaker than many other Australian jurisdictions. We believe there should be an increased cooling off period of 5 years for ministers, shadow ministers, members of parliament, parliamentary secretaries, senior ministerial and shadow ministerial advisors and senior public services, engaging lobbying activity where it comes under the area which they once managed in their portfolio. This is one of the many changes we'll be advocating in the submission to Operation Eclipse. I encourage every member to make a submission, to speak to their own parties and make sure we can improve lobbying in this state.